Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all people round about, when they shall be in siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. Are the days of Zechariah warned of upon us? Join Stephen Benoon and host Bonnie Harvey for a discussion of Jerusalem, the Flashpoint.
Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Flashpoint. There's the spark that will ignite the world. With me, special guest, Stephen Benoon, and he is coming to America here. He is in a mad dash fury to do everything, but he has kindly taken an hour out of his schedule to talk to us. Thank you so much, Stephen. I know that you're under much stress, and you and Yana are going to be doing the conference here. And tell us about that conference once again before we get started, would you please?
Sure, Bonnie. That's we're actually will be coming first off when we fly into New York, then go to Duluth, Georgia. We're part of a conference on the 5th and 6th of August next month, and anyone that's interested, there are still tickets available for the conference. We had to do tickets because it was limited seating there, but I think there's still about 25 tickets still left available. And anyone that would like to come, if they're able to come, to a website that was created for it called globalversusflatearth.com. Now, I'm not speaking about flat Earth or global or any of that, but there will be a debate, a friendly debate between Steve Pigeon and Zen Garcia on that issue. But Yana will be speaking herself there about transhumanism, vaccines. And on Sunday, the 6th, I will be speaking myself about the Middle East crisis, how things are shaping up based on prophecy throughout the Middle East, and especially Israel, and how it's impacting Israel right now. So no doubt it'll be a blessing for many people. We have a couple of other speakers as well that'll be speaking. I forget some of the names there, but it'd certainly be a blessing for those that would like to join us there.
Okay, once again, globalversusflatearth.com. All one word, no hyphens?
All one word, no hyphens, and it will be at the Holiday Inn in Duluth, Georgia. So we'd love to meet people there. We're planning on doing some little mini conferences, or private conferences, I should say, while we are there as well. One of those will be in Orlando, Florida. We just haven't set itinerary as of yet, but it'll just be like a one-day event only. And then we may get around a little bit before I head back to Europe again. So hopefully we'll get to see some people while we're there.
Oh, that would be nice. I'm sure you have many listening friends here. And if you look at tickets today, well, I don't know. By the time this airs, it's going to be too late to get the 2-week deal. All right. Well, I'm looking forward. I'm going to look at plane tickets myself. Let's go to Israel. What is happening there, Stephen?
It is a mess, Bonnie. Since last Friday, a week ago, before Shabbat, of course, being Shabbat, or in Israel, it's a Shabbat now, we had the shooting incident that took place on the Temple Mount. Very serious situation that killed 2 Israeli police officers there. And now the rioting has just completely gone out of control there over the fact that Israel has installed metal detectors for the entrance of the Muslims that are going to pray at their respective temples there on the Temple Mount, or I should say mosque, not temples, but their mosque on the Temple Mount. And it's very concerning, Bonnie, because the Israeli authorities released video footage. They took the security cams and they showed the coordinated effort that was done by the Palestinian terrorists that brought these weapons, smuggled them in to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, hid them there, come back out, and change clothes, different guys coming in, going out. Then the other ones get the arms, come back, and then shoot in the back the Israeli police officers there near the gate on the Temple Mount. And very cowardly act to begin with, and yet at the same time, this is supposed to be a site. Naturally, it is sacred to the Jewish people where our first and second temple once stood. But, you know, the Muslim world, their sacred site as well. But why would they want to kill someone there on the Temple Mount is beyond me. But now, Bonnie, we have Massive protests began to erupt over the last few days. Mahmoud Abbas is in China right now. Kind of interesting that he's over in China conveniently. And the Fatah movement have really been spearheading the protest inside Jerusalem, and they have become extremely violent. There have been 4 Palestinians that have been part of the riots that have been killed already just in the last 24 hours. We have had 3 Israelis that have been killed in the West Bank from individual attacks as all this is escalating. 1 is in critical condition from a stabbing wound as well. And of course, the riots both over on the Mount of Olives overlooking the Temple Mount, a lot of riots there today, also around the Old City, close to Damascus Gate. It's like a scene of a war, Bonnie. I mean, I've seen some of the footage. I've talked to friends there on the ground inside the Old City today, getting a better idea of what's happening, just how serious the unrest is. And one good friend of mine, he said to me today, he said, Steve, it doesn't make sense. He said, here the Israeli government is putting up metal detectors, not just for the security of the Israeli police and the Jews and the Christians that visit the Temple Mount, but also for the security of the Muslims as well. He said it's their security as well that they should be taken into consideration, and not looking at this as being a slap in the face. We're going to give you security. He said they're the ones that smuggled the weapons in. And so therefore, for the safety of even the children that come up on the Temple Mount with their parents, they should be going through these metal detectors. And it really, Bonnie, it only seems realistic that it should be this way and should have been this way from long ago, because if you're Jewish and Christian visitors that visit the Temple Mount, that have to access it from the Kotel, where the Wailing Wall is, they have to go through extreme measures of security. Not only are you going through metal detectors, you're going through X-ray machines, you're going through searches, etc. And the only thing they're doing at the entrances, like the Lion's Gate, etc., the different places where they enter, the Muslims enter into for their access to the Temple Mount, they're only giving them metal detectors. They're not even doing the X-ray machines. It's just metal detectors so they can determine if someone is carrying some kind of large weapon on them.
Yes.
And yet,
I have been through that access from the Kotel. I have been through that. And indeed you do. I mean, there's you wait in a line, it's slow, and everything is put through an X-ray detector. You walk through a metal detector. And
well, Bonnie, this is what's even more absurd. The State Department issued a statement against Israel, basically claiming that the Israeli government was inciting this violence that is happening now. I couldn't imagine anything more absurd. And I say this, I mean, not just the fact that I am born Jewish, but I'm very much, as anybody knows, and I know you know as well, I'm very neutral when it comes to, or fair, I should say, when it comes to the situation in the Middle East, and oftentimes have taken up for the Arabic world when I see things that are not just. But this is clearly unjust towards Israel. And for the State Department to suddenly take a change and blame the Israeli government and saying that they're inciting violence because the Israeli government, for security of their own personnel and for the security of the Jewish people, had to make this measure, that's just something is really wrong. And what's even worse was the Palestinian Christians have also joined in with the Muslims on the issue, siding with them, saying that it's totally unjust, totally unwarranted for the Israeli government to install metal detectors. There's something deeper going on, Bonnie, than just protests. It's something deeper than just the metal detectors. It's almost as if this has been a planned, orchestrated event, and that's what my concern is. What would be the timing, too, that Mahmoud Abbas would be in China, that this event would go down? And that could be coincidence. I don't want to say that it was orchestrated on that part there, but clearly the desire to bring the old city of Jerusalem under internet has to have a flashpoint for them to justify the means of putting a United Nations force there in the old city. And this may be the very flashpoint they need to justify trying to force on Israel a UN force in Jerusalem. And also, as we've been seeing already, they have been preparing the lines for pre-1967 border now for some time, other than the fact that they say that they're going to allow West Jerusalem to be Israel's capital. So I'm concerned, Bonnie, at the same time, not only for the safety of both Muslims and Jews in the old city there, and this violence is happening, but I'm also concerned as an international plot in order to gain control of the old city, not just the Temple Mount, but the entire old city, which has been promised, according to the late Joel Beinerman, Israeli investigative journalist, who has uncovered this information, as well as Italian journalists who have clearly shown that they're going to internationalize the old city of Jerusalem and put it in a different power altogether. And of course, Joel Beinerman said the Vatican would be the power that would control the old city, the entire old city, which would also take away the Temple Mount, not the Temple Mount, but the Wailing Wall, the Kotel would also come under their jurisdiction. And that's dangerous already, Bonnie, because we're already seeing now that there has been a major push by the United Nations to take away sites that have been always known to be holy sites for the Jewish people, such as in Hebron, where we have the tombs of Abraham and the patriarchs there, and now they're calling these Palestinian holy sites. Totally trying to distance Israel's connection to their own promised land. And so I see a dangerous trend coming, but I do see a global government definitely putting itself into position. The Pope of Rome just recently stated publicly to the Italian news, I forget the name of the news media that brought this out last week, but he stated that the United States and its relationship with Trump and Putin has become of a major concern, and that the U.S. must go under a one-world government, and as well as the European Union must be combined into one nation, and as well be put under a new world government. So that lets us know, Bonnie, that this is the direction that they're taking this into. That's part of the plan. What's going to happen next? That's a good question. But now they're also, besides the riots in Jerusalem, I was seeing here just a little while ago that there has been massive protests that have joined together in Amman, Jordan, and in other parts of the Middle East as well, rallying support for the Palestinians trying to regain their absolute authority, I guess you would say, for the Temple Mount, and not allowing the Jewish people their right to their own holy site. We're definitely looking at the covenant getting ready to get kicked in there, Bonnie, and I would say this here. What's going to sweeten the deal, and I don't know how sweet that deal will be when they do this, but it's definitely part of the plot, and that is the only guarantee they will give Israel is that they will build a third temple adjacent to the Dome of the Rock. This is something that we know is coming. I have watched closely too. My good friend Yehuda Glick, I talked with him in Jerusalem not too long ago, and one of the things that I see that he's even pushing for is the rights for all religions to be able to come to the Temple Mount. And it's people like Yehuda Glick who really want to I don't know how the best way to put it, because I feel like that Rabbi Glick really has a genuine heart. He has a love for people. And he knows that the God of Israel said that the third temple, or the temple of God, period, was a house of prayer for all nations. And this is very true there. But at the same token, I can also see the conspiracy that'll be used by an Antichrist system that will allow a third temple to be built, but it will still never be truly under the sovereignty of the Jewish people as it was 2,000 plus years ago. So it's still coming with strings attached. And I think the violence is, from time to time, it always seems like that they use violence to try to get the Jewish people to cave into the demands that they want. And that's what's really, really sad, Bonnie. They're going to use violence. And it always brings back to my mind Micah's prophecy when the Lord says to Israel, and just paraphrasing, she's a woman in travail. And why do you cry out aloud? Is there no king in thee? Is your counselor perished? So even though we've returned home and we're there to be there forevermore, there's still, and it's not just limited to Micah. We have Zechariah that speaks of this as well, other prophets. But we're going to go through some very difficult times just prior to the coming of the Mashiach, or the return of the Mashiach, as I would prefer to say. And Israel's eyes begin to open, which kind of brings me to another thought too, Bonnie. And I have to be very careful in the way I say this, but I do want to share something with people. I know that there's a lot of believers in Yeshua, in Jesus, that know that we are seeing more and more Jews coming to know the knowledge of Jesus Christ, Yeshua. But there is actually a move happening inside of Jerusalem, specifically in the Orthodox community, that is unprecedented. But oddly enough, there have been many that have been coming forth wanting to believe in Yeshua as Mashiach. But when I say oddly enough, they do not want the typical Greek version of Yeshua. And I'm not saying this in any slam on any religion or anything like that, but what it is I'm finding out through very close sources that I have there on the ground that have seen just in the last week or so 20 more Orthodox Jews, and we're talking about serious Orthodox Jews, like the Chabad group that I'm a part of as well, that are believing the Messiah, but at the same time, they're not wanting to be affiliated with any of the mainstream Orthodoxy Christian religions. And I will say, I don't know for sure exactly why, but I do know this. I know that they've come to know him, not even because of the Brit Chadashah, which is the New Testament, but because of seeing him written in the Tanakh, in the writings, the Torah, the writings and the prophets. So this is still, it's a wonderful thing to see that there are Jews that are beginning to really, in large numbers, in Jerusalem of all places, recognizing Yeshua is the Messiah. And so that's just been music to my ears. And yet it seems too, Bonnie, to be fitting for the time that we're living in. There was one man in particular that actually made a comment, a Jewish man, that made a comment to a friend of mine, and he says perhaps and he was quoting New Testament. He says perhaps the dispensation of the Gentiles is concluding now, because he was one of the ones that had begun to believe on Yeshua's Messiah. So no doubt he's been reading the New Testament to make a statement like that. And but
I have no doubt about that, Stephen.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the turn that most mainstream Christianity has taken in America to embrace homosexuality, to embrace, many of them even embrace, allowing Muslims into their services. And of course, when they do this, they have to alter some of the basic tenets, and the identity of who Yeshua is going to be one of the first ones. But when they don't want a Greco Yeshua Jesus, is that not good, Stephen?
I personally think it is good, and here's the reason why I say this, Bonnie, and that is because we have had 2,000 years of division, unfortunately, in the religious system and circles, and we have gone so far away from what the apostles actually originally taught. When I say the apostles, we know the very words of Jesus himself, But when I say the apostles, they kept to what he had taught. And then as time has gone by, it's just been one doctrine after another. And forget the fact that we have, let's say, the main doctrinal views out there. And this is, like I said, this is no disrespect to people's personal views, whether you're Baptist, Methodist. I give my life to the Lord as a Jewish boy in a Baptist church, so it's nothing to do with the denominational system. But what the Jewish people are seeing too, though, is there is such a major division in Christianity, and it grows by the day. And then, of course, you have the United States that has always had the title of a Christian nation, and yet it's the furthest thing from that. The roots of Christian nation that the nation was founded on, not by every leader, of course, but many good, godly men and women that founded the nation of America. We've gone long beyond the grassroots of the true Christian message. And so for Judaism, they still believe Moses to be their prophet. And, they don't believe that you can just, have one part of the Bible and throw the other part out. And this is what is so beautiful, is when they recognize Yeshua, the Mashiach, to be right there in the lids of the Tanakh. Yes. And at the same time, they can read the Brit Chadashah, the New Testament, and they can see for themselves as well. And there's so many, Bonnie, that are watching Israeli News Live because we do the prophetic teachings, and they write to me. And they're saying the exact same things that a good friend of mine is saying in Israel now. They're saying, Steve, we will not accept this. They said, in fact, they'll tell me this, that's why we listen to what you're saying, because we feel like that you're at least bringing us back to the way it should be.
Yes. As far as understanding of political events or understanding of who the Jewish Messiah is, or both?
Who the Jewish Messiah is. It's more, well, the one thing that they kind of get interested in as well, because we do both. We have the Israeli News Live, and then we have Danun Institute, so they'll watch the teaching side as well. But they generally get picked up from Israeli News Live, where we're examining things politically. Yes. And of course, then we have Rabbi Tovia Singer and we have Rabbi Winston, who are both extremely well-known rabbis in Israel. And both of these men, I correspond with them privately, and they both are teaching the exact same things that I have shared with them, minus the Messiah part. In fact, Rabbi Winston trying his best to get me to come back to Judaism. So is Tovia Singer, but they both have a respect for what I believe, and they both, but they're still trying to warn their people of the dangers that we're seeing that is happening politically with Israel. But naturally, if they're listening, though, Bonnie, they're hearing the side of Yeshua as well. So they yes. can't. As Tovia Singer wrote me one time, not too long ago, he said, I really have got to understand why you believe that Yeshua is Messiah. He said, Steve, you don't believe like any Christian I've ever met in my life. He said, I can defeat, being a little boastful, no doubt, but he said, I can defeat any Orthodox Christian. He said, I'll defeat him with his own Bible in a heartbeat. He said, but I have no way to defeat you in a debate. He said, and I'll never debate you because of it. He said, because you're not Orthodox. But yet, he said, you have my curiosity up because you believe Yeshua in a way I have never been able to come to terms with. And he says, and I'm just really curious.
Wow. Well, the best introduction of Yeshua is certainly in the parables of Moses, in the prophets. I mean, the prophets are powerful. If you can't prove Yeshua from the Tanakh, you have no business, accepting him in the New Testament, I don't think, because all that is the fulfillment. Well, the fulfillment of what? How do you know it's true? How do you know that this is what he should fulfill? And how do you even know what he is fulfilling when he's doing some of those things that, if you didn't know, some degree of the Jewish perspective, you wouldn't know that he is fulfilling some of their that were given to Moses and not written in the Tanakh. So anyway, we are at the halfway point. Please join us on the other side, folks.
Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all people round about, when they shall be in siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. Are the days of Zechariah warned of upon us? Join Stephen Ben-Nun and host Bonnie Harvey for a discussion of Jerusalem, the Flashpoint.
Stephen, we were just talking about the number of Jews, especially the Orthodox Jews, who are coming into a knowledge of Jesus, Yeshua, as the Messiah. Would you say that these people have had a rebirth experience?
You know, Bonnie, I do believe in some cases they have. It is fascinating to see what they're going through, and to know that indeed, for them, it's very grieving as well, because what we're finding out is that they're realizing that they missed the Mashiach. He had come already, and generally, as a Jewish believer, one of my favorite places to go to when I'm speaking to another Jewish believer would be the Book of Daniel, because it's probably one of the most powerful witnesses you can use. But you have to understand, Orthodox Jewry will not use Daniel so much as proving the point of the Mashiach as they would say Isaiah. And the reason being is because Daniel, they consider that because he was in exile, that his words are not as valid as if he had been in the homeland. Now that's pretty far out there to jump through a hoop like that. But then, you could always go back and say, well, Moses wasn't in the homeland either, and yet we believe the Torah to be the Torah. So what does it mean we have to be in Jerusalem? But the point, though, really comes down to this here, and that is something stirring in the Jewish heart. We are at the time of the coming of the Mashiach for them. And it just really reminds me of Ezekiel's prophecy, and it says that the children of Israel would be hurled to the power of the sword. And that's 35 verse 5. I'm just paraphrasing it. But they'd be hurled to the power of the sword in the time of their calamity, which was 70 AD, and also at the time that their iniquity would have an end. Ezekiel's speaking directly with Daniel's prophecy, chapter 9, down where it says that their iniquity would be no more. Bonnie, that's the second coming of the Messiah. And here we have a third intifada that's been governed by the power of the sword over the Jewish people here in the last 6 months or so. We are literally living in a time of biblical prophecy fulfilling right before our eyes, and no one is paying attention to it. But it seems to go with it. Here, Israel right now is in turmoil once again with now this latest incident over the Temple Mount. More stabbings again today in Jerusalem. More people killed as a result of these terror attacks that are going on. And the biblical prophecy said this would happen at the time their iniquity should have an end. Well, that tells us that all these Orthodox Jews that are coming to Mashiach right now, they are part of that prophecy. What's going to happen when suddenly, like in a 24-hour period where there's a wave of the Holy Spirit that sweeps over the nation of Israel, Bonnie? You know, when the Bible says in one day she's born a nation, many people looked in 1948 as that being that day. That's nice, and it could be so, but I have always believed that there would be something that will strike the nation of Israel, and they will evangelize their own nation in 24 hours of some event that'll take place that will cause the Jewish people to wake up in a 24-hour period, because it just doesn't seem that 1948, of course, it was the Independence War, but we didn't win a war in 24 hours. And secondly, the Jewish people had been coming home since 1858 under the Ottoman Empire, when they were just desperate for tax money and began to sell the land to the wealthy Jews of Iran and Iraq, that region of Iraq anyway, that came over and bought up land both around Tel Aviv and around the Galilee area. So the Jews had already been coming back for, almost 100 years by that time. So I think that we're we're on the verge of seeing a major wave happen. And what better time, Bonnie, than not even so much the Feast of Tabernacles? What better time than for the Day of Atonement? I mean, my gosh, this is the most powerful day of all. Do you know the very lambs? You know, there are two lambs that are offered up during biblical times for the Day of Atonement. And one of those lambs, they confessed the sins of Israel. They take him out and they released him out into the desert. And the other one, you know, of course, he was a scapegoat, and the other one becomes a sacrifice. And Yeshua was both of those. Scapegoat, Israel's sins. He bore them far away, you know, and he also was a sacrifice as well. And in the story of Joseph, we see the exact same thing. He played both parts. And when his brothers, for example, when they took, and I've always wondered if this wasn't where we actually get the Day of Atonement from, is the story of Joseph. Because, you know, when they sold his brother out, what did they do, Bonnie? They took and they were trying to figure out how to hide their sin. So they take and they kill a little lamb, and they take the blood of that lamb and put it on Joseph's coat, goes back to their father and said, "Judge whether or not this is your son's coat or no." Well, sure it was. But Joseph himself bore in his own body the iniquity of his brother, and he carried it away from his own father, Jacob, all the way down into Egypt, and Jacob had no idea. So he was scapegoat, but that little lamb was the sacrificial goat. I have always wondered if it wasn't for the sake of the goat that they killed and put the blood on his coat, had it not been that God would have probably never pardoned their sin.
Yeah. That's a good thought. And he, Joseph, saved the nation.
Exactly. Exactly.
You know, I have heard, I'm not sure where, that the rains seem to be shifting. I mean, talk about the blessing going from the Gentiles back to the Jews, as spoken of in the Brit Hadashah, or the New Testament, that the rains were shifting from the north to the south. Is that correct? Can you address that?
I'm not familiar with that one.
Okay. All right.
That is something I'm not familiar with. So you got me on that one, Bonnie.
Well, are we finished with Israel and the terrorism that's going on there and where it's headed? Probably you offered that it was headed to ultimately the UN peacekeeping, the necessity of a UN peacekeeping detail there, and probably to an absolute split. That would be, you know, it would get so bad that they would agree to the split, the Jews, that is, and especially if there were a sweetener in there of the permission to rebuild the third temple, or to build the third temple, and to offer sacrifices. So, you know, we'll keep our eye on that, certainly. Stephen, anything more you want to say before we go someplace else?
No, I think that pretty much surmises up what we're looking at right now. And it's just time.
Is there, what about the ceasefire in Syria and Iran?
The ceasefire is really kind of an interesting situation. We're looking at two different things that are going on right now over in Syria, besides the fact that Russia and Russia and the United States agreed upon a ceasefire that has been somewhat holding sporadically in the southwest part of the country. We've had other things that have been developing as well. One, Russia was promised to be able to take over the security along the Golan Heights. And now Israel is protesting majorly for Russia's presence there. And I think the reason probably so, for the most part, Bonnie, is Gog of Magog. This is what Israel thinks of when they think of Russia on their border. But yet, what's a little bit strange to me is that Russia and Israel do have a very close relationship. You know, after all, 2 million of the Jews that are living there in Israel, about a fifth of the Jews, or I would say, or a fourth of the Jews, are all Russians to begin with. But the other issue for this as well, that to me seems like I'm wondering, why is Israel even surprised about this? Something that you probably have never heard in the news before, and that is Quneitra, the little city that is only 5 kilometers from the Israeli border there on the Golan. Russia built a huge hospital there. It's not been fully finished. When I was there back, last time I was on the border there, at the end of 2016, I should say, is when I actually had talked about this once before, that the Russians actually had built a medical facility, but they had not completed it because of the war. They were working with Syria to do that. So I think this is one of the reasons why Russia wanted to be able to secure the border there with Israel, and as well, perhaps Russia, because they're allies with Iran and also with, I can't say as much that they're allies with Hezbollah, but they are close allies with Iran. But these are major issues for Israel, and understandably so. But then we run into another problem. Now we have what appears to be a good thing, and I'm really hoping it is. President Trump has, according to the Washington Post, and it did get confirmed today, he has halted the financial aid that the CIA has been giving to the Free Syrian Army and being able to stop them from getting weapons to fight against the Syrian government. And that seemed to be a shock to many people. We just reported this the other day. RT also brought out this information. Then today it was confirmed that, in fact, Washington has authorized the freeze of weapons going to the Free Syrian Army and their training. But here's the catch-22, Bonnie. Breitbart News brought out that the reason why the freeze was put there is because these weapons that the U.S. has been supplying to the Free Syrian Army has actually been falling into the hands of the jihadists. And I'm very concerned because I think I know what tipped the scale to cause the White House to halt it. And that is, we have in Arabic reports up in Afghanistan that there were upwards to 30 plus U.S. soldiers killed in a major firefight on the northern border of Afghanistan. And in a different report, a separate report, we saw that one of those that were killed was a U.S. general. Now, this is not made mainstream media. And again, I can only say this is coming from one Arabic source news that I know of, and then there is another news source that is not Arabic. It's an Italian journalist that's also reported on this incident in Afghanistan. But the Italian journalist also noted that these jihadists that are fighting, and he calls it ISIS 2.0, that they were using the SCAR special force rifle that is only given to the elite forces of the U.S. government, and they were also using M16. They were using the majority of nothing but American weapons. So this could have been why President Trump did this freeze, which would be a good thing for Syria. But at the same time, if it's only done for that reason there, it doesn't mean that the war will stop in Syria until Bashar al-Assad is out of power. Even though we know President Trump is saying he doesn't have to leave now, it's a very bad situation. And in fact, Damascus, another thing that I've not seen in mainstream media, is under heavy bombardment on its eastern flank. And we're talking about in majorly close into the suburbs of eastern Damascus. It's no longer just way off in the distance. It's getting very bad. And the Syrian government has been bombing heavily because of the close combat, and they're suffering a lot of defeats in this area right now. So is Damascus on the verge of falling? It could be. And this could be another reason why President Trump might freeze the assets to the Free Syrian Army. If they see that the victory is nearly there, this may be another reason why we're starting to see some ceasefires. Maybe they've made agreements with Russia that, okay, if you allow us to finish the job, we'll begin to back off on some of the things that are going on here. So we just have to kind of wait and see how that plays out and which direction it's going to go.
Is it the Free Syrian Army? I mean, it's to free Syria, free Syria of Assad. Is that correct?
Well, this is supposed to be the general consensus of what the Free Syrian Army is, but according to the Syrian government, the Free Syrian Army is made up of 35 different nationalities from around the globe. So they, as Assad has said many times, it can hardly be called a civil war in the country when you have all these jihadists from around the world that are involved there. And you know, Bonnie, just recently, the ex-foreign minister of, or ex-prime minister of Qatar comes out and says publicly that he says, look, yes, we're guilty of funding jihadists. We're guilty of funding terrorists inside of Syria to topple the government. But he says, you know, don't forget, he said, we didn't do this alone. We had help from the United States. We had help from Turkey. We had help from Saudi Arabia. He says, all the countries right now that are pointing the finger at us, they're the ones that were helping us to arm these radical groups to overthrow President Bashar al-Assad. It's just because of their relationship with Iran, now they're being thrown under the bus by their own allies because they don't want to ditch Iran.
Yes, and aren't they also made up a lot by mercenaries?
Yes, they are. And that's the entire fighting force there in the Middle East is nothing but mercenaries. The Russians have brought that out as well. And indirectly, Bonnie, even the U.S. has. If you go back and look at some of the things that John Kerry says when he was Secretary of State, it's obvious that the U.S. knows there's a lot of mercenaries, a lot of even mainstream media, BBC, U.S. News, they talk about these mercenaries that go in there to fight. And speaking of mercenaries, that's another twist as well. The U.S. is beginning to do the same thing that Russia has been doing. In Russia, back during the situation with Ukraine, they would never acknowledge that they had sent troops in to help fight Ukraine on eastern for the eastern Ukraine, for Donetsk and Luhansk regions there. They always called these are volunteer soldiers. And I noticed just recently the U.S. is starting to say the exact same thing. They said, we're not fighting, but we do have U.S. volunteer soldiers that are now fighting in this war to free Syria from ISIS. I thought that was kind of interesting that the U.S. is picking up on the same propaganda that Russia has used in Russia's fight with Ukraine. Now the U.S. is using the same tactics in Syria. I guess it just seems to sound better or something if you make it look less intrusive of the U.S. government being involved in Syria. But they figure Russia uses that same terminology, so now the U.S. is using that terminology. But nonetheless, it's just a lot of paid mercenaries that are fighting in the country. As Vladimir Putin said when he was speaking to the press conference a couple of years ago, he said they go to whoever pays the most, and that's who they fight for.
Yes. I mean, it all sounds like, central banker George Soros type funding. I mean, who can put that money out and put it out secretly?
Well, Bonnie, I think that comes back down to the military-industrial complex. My son come into me yesterday, and he says to me, Dad, he says, do you know that President Trump has actually been able to increase the revenue in America by $1.4 trillion, I think is what he tells me. And he's really into politics. He's a young man, but he's very much into watching politics, how it plays out. And I told him, I said, well, that could be so. He says, well, they normally try to say this was because of Obama's legislation, that the reason why we have this surplus, kind of like during the days of Bush and back when Clinton was president, they fought out who did what for the economy. I said, but in reality, I said, even if President Trump did do it, I said, which he probably did, I can't see Obama did anything for the economy. I said, it all comes down to weapons. That's how they're making the money. And this is why the destabilization of the Middle East, it's not just, of course, it's for political gain. It's for amassing the world's wealth under one dominant nation or whatever the case may be. But that's how they pay their deficit down, is selling weapons, create fear, and then sell weapons. But the thing is, Bonnie, they're all getting into it now. Even small nations. Ukraine itself is manufacturing and building specialized weapons now. India, China, everybody is in the game because they know that destabilized world is, with war and fighting, is big business. And maybe this is why we see ISIS popping up all over the world, just so they can keep a war going to keep making more money. But when's this going to end? This is just insane. There's no end in sight. And it's troubling. It's very troubling to see that we have gone so far, modern society, that everything is nothing but about war and killing and mayhem.
Well, the central banks that pretty much wag the world, they know they're trying to keep their system, hence their control, alive, and they don't know how else to do it except housing, etc., disability or unemployment. I mean, that keeps our society here deluded, thinking that it's okay, but all those people are just, being artificially kept off the streets and to soup lines. That they're desperate. I don't think they know where to go, and the dollar is maxed out. This system is maxed out. The system of debt is being maxed out. So I think war is the only thing they have left going for them, Stephen.
You're right, Bonnie, and this is what they're trying to capitalize on. In fact, I watched a statement on RT News that just came out this morning that Russia says that their greatest threat right now is NATO's naval force, of course, spearheaded by the United States. And as I'm reading the article, I could not help but think of this as being, well, it's not so much a threat for Russia, but it's just a way to say, okay, we're going to also build a lot of ships. Anybody want to buy any? It's all about money. And of course, Russia's in the same game, as Putin said a long time ago. He said, as long as the U.S. would respect our national interest as well, and that's being economically, then we'll get along. But of course, there's a power grab in the world, and I think it's exactly what you're saying, Bonnie. It's a vacuum, and the dollar is collapsing. I'm sure the Chinese yuan will end up replacing it, which is very interesting in itself. The more that I watch what's happening in the east part of the world, you cannot help but wonder if they know something is up. They
Yes.
know that they're going to switch to this other system, doing business with China.
Yes.
They built this railway all the way from China to the European Union. Zeman, the president of the Czech Republic, he's had big business with China. Everybody's doing it. Mahmoud Abbas, Palestinian Authority, where is he at? He's at China, working out deals with China. China is going to be that next frontier as the world closes down, we should say. But everybody's preparing for what's going to be in the East. And I guess it's because the civilization, as they say, traveled west as far as it can go. It's got to go back east again. I've heard that old saying many, many times. And maybe that's where we're at now. Very troubling indeed, Bonnie. Very troubling indeed what we're seeing. And the only remedy is the coming of the Lord Jesus.
That's it.
I see no other remedy.
Oh, we're way too far in with Monsanto, with chemtrails, with vaccines, with water pollution, with food pollution, with the deep state being so entrenched that a popular president cannot do one thing without being checkmated. We're in way too far. I think that Father is giving us time to see there is no human solution. But we are out of time, brother. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule, for actually making time. It's midnight where you are. Well, it's 1 a.m. by now, and you have a busy day tomorrow. So thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening, and we will join everybody next week.
Sounds great. Shalom, shalom, everyone.